Well, a very warm welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Briefly, before I start a session, would love to tell you about the community we are building. It's called Tejas Cyber Network. We are a global community of cyber leaders. That's a website. People ask me what is Tejas. In Spanish, it means a friend or an ally. We are all about developing long-term friendships. And in yoga, it means strong inner strength of brilliance. And we have some really brilliant and smart people amongst us. We are a project-oriented community, and I'll talk a little about some of the themes that we focus on. We are vendor agnostic. We are self-sustaining. We are a membership-based community. We are open to all, and we focus on primarily in the cyber domain, but we also include security, privacy, audit, risk, compliance, people who are doing cyber product management, and people who are writing code for developing cyber products. So we have engineering folks as well from cyber companies. Our mission is to touch maximum number of people and create maximum impact in our lifetime. We have one life to live, so we are going to go max on everything. These are some of our design principles. Everything we do has to directly benefit our members, otherwise we don't do it. Second design principle is we have very strict professional standards. We call them ultra professionalism, especially since we are a global community. This is important so that people can trust and collaborate with each other. And we work on themes and we call them projects. When we say project, it means work. So we do actual work towards the success of our members. These are some of the projects or themes that we work on. The first one is Project See Your Path to CXO, that how do we prepare the next generation of cyber leaders? Again, it's a journey of upskilling and also building a network which actually helps. And we call it first deserve, then desire. Second thing is entrepreneurship. A lot of cyber practitioners never become entrepreneurs. Like, how do I create the ladder versus climbing the ladder? And it just remains a dream. And in the community, we are trying to create a vibe that you can do it too, and you can start a product-based company as well. We also focus on skills. So we all what we are because of our skills. So it's a journey of upskilling and learning. And this session is actually under Project S. The next thing we focus on is called Project H Health, so that you have sustainable success and you actually are healthy and to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Our goal is to get people started on their own journey because it's their journey, not anyone else's, so that they can build physical and mental resilience to face adversity in the economy. Stress will always be there, bad stuff will always happen, but if we can learn to respond versus reacting, we can manage these situations better. And we also kickstarted another project called J, where how do we help people thrive in their career and in their jobs. Okay, now coming to the real presentation. So OpenAI just launched very recently a new model, what they call GPT-5.4 Cyber. And this session is all about that. So we have briefly about me, started my career in the Big Four in Ernst & Young and KPMG, and also done investments through a group called Silicon Valley CISO Investments. These days, I run my own advisory firm called Fixing Security, and I also run Tejas Cyber Network Community. So I've done some interesting things in my career. Worked a lot of Fortune 500, did 6 startups back to back. One went IPO, one got acquired, and so on. So GPT-5.4 Cyber is a frontier model. So these AI labs like OpenAI or Anthropic, they're called frontier AI labs because they're developing cutting edge models which are at the tip of the spear. And they mentioned that this model was purposely fine-tuned for additional cyber capabilities and fewer capability restrictions. And they call this being cyber permissive, that we are being cyber permissive. These models which they are going to put forth are cyber permissive. And this is their stated goal, that how do we make sure that we can give this out to as many folks as possible while preventing misuse. And we'll also talk about something called preparedness framework, For example, Anthropic has the Responsible Scaling Policy, or RSP, and OpenAI's version is called the Preparedness Framework, in which they classify different models. And this was classified as possessing high cyber capability. And again, this is very recent, only like the model before, which was 5.3 Codex and 5.4 Thinking, were designated as high cyber capability. So this is the program they launched recently called Trusted Access for Cyber. And it's an identity-based program where you have to prove who you are, where you work, and they partnered with a limited set of organizations. And the important thing here is the date. So this is not a new thing. I mean, we saw this announcement last week that GPT 5.4 Cyber has been put forth, but the TAG program was actually launched on February 5th, where they were already partnering with a limited set of organizations. And this is my, my own working theory. I think that Anthropic Project Glasswing was a direct response to the OpenAI TAG program. I don't think OpenAI did a better job at announcing the TAG program. And Anthropic, in my opinion, stole the thunder by doing a better job at marketing the program. But OpenAI already had this Trusted Access for Cyber program, which was launched in February 5th. With the new announcement, they're now scaling up to thousands of verified individual defenders and hundreds of teams. And access is being granted through a know your customer style, identity verification, and tiered controls. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So basically, anyone who is approved through this program will gain access to versions of existing models which are cyber permissive. So it doesn't mean that everyone who applies is going to get access to GPT 5.4 Cyber. It's only on the customers in the highest tiers. So we don't know about what tiers they are actually, like the tier 1, 2, 3, 4, or something else. But customers in the highest tier will get access to GPT-4 Cyber. And since this program is not new, it was launched in February 5th, 2026. There are customers who were already given access to the previous models, especially like Codex Security, and we'll talk a little bit about them as well. Which previous models are we talking about? And they could be additional models, even older versions, in which you just remove the guardrails. And so you can use the existing, because it's not going to, if you're trying to develop an exploit or something, it's not going to block you. So even with the existing models, you can make them cyber permissive by removing these guardrails. But the new ones, as per them, have better cyber capabilities. So the ones which are already in TAG, they can request to get access to the higher models, including GPT-4.Cyber. So 3 ways to get request access. You can go to chatgpt.com/cyber. Enterprises have to go through the rep. And actually, there's a form that you can fill out. So this is what it looks like. And customers already in TAG have to fill a Google form. So it was very interesting that it was not like a website, it's just a Google form. Everyone with me so far, give me a thumbs up. Okay, nice. So this is the company that OpenAI uses for identity verification. And again, very interesting how they do it and what they do. And there was actually some controversy in Feb. I think if you look at the references, under other articles, there are 2 articles which basically talk about what really happened. There were 3 researchers, and they published a blog post in which they went into detail. They found some endpoints and so on. So I'll let you read that article. So earlier, OpenAI used to use a service called Yoti. They started in late 2025, and at some point in 2026, they moved over to Persona completely. And you need a government-issued ID. It cannot be something which is not government-issued. It cannot be digital or like a mobile or electronic ID. It has to be a physical government ID. And they support over 200 countries. And they also make sure that people are not registering under multiple organizations. So they check that this ID has not been used to verify another organization in the past 90 days. And this one kind of a little bit talks about what are the policies. Some people are comfortable and some people are not comfortable with that. But they do check you against international sanctions watch list. And they will actually take a selfie of you where they check for liveness that, are you like a real person or that's a deep fake? And somehow they hash it and they check it. They keep on checking it. The reason being is maybe today you are a good person, but 2 weeks later, maybe you decide to become a malicious actor and your name shows up in a particular list. How would they know? So many of these companies which do these checks maintain data about facial geometry, like how you look like. And I'm pretty sure they store some metrics. It's not your actual picture, but they store some sort of metric and they keep on checking you against those watch lists so that if somebody becomes a malicious actor, at some point in time, they can take your access again. So it's not a one-time check because you're like, oh, I just got in and, I'll always have access. No, that's not the case. They do in some shape or form. They don't have your actual selfie, but they might have some metrics of your facial geometry and so on. There's one more interesting thing is it's not just your ID. They actually run a device health check, which people don't know. So they do a fingerprint of your device. They check your browser integrity. They check which IP are you coming from, and any automation detection, which is the whole application is being filled automatically, and is this not a human doing this application and this identity verification? And I have seen that people sometimes runs into issues because they have all these plugins enabled, which block scripts. And if persona is not able to do this silent check, it will fail you and it won't tell you why did it fail you. So if you have been trying to get access and you have been denied, you might want to use a clean browser and with these privacy and security extensions disabled. One thing which was very interesting is they made an announcement, but didn't release a model card, which is the practice. When you release a new frontier model, you publish a model card which talks about the capabilities, the benchmarks, any evaluation scores, or details about how did you do the testing and so on. So there's a little bit technical opacity around GPT 5.4 Cyber. They do say that it has been fine-tuned, but they don't tell which domains were fine-tuned. Like, did you ferret malware families? Did you feed it reverse engineering tooling conventions or exploit classes? New capabilities. And the question is, okay, you launched 5.4 Cyber, you're calling it Cyber, but what are the new capabilities? So they said, okay, we removed some of the gates from in terms of the guardrails, but the only new capability they talk about is binary reverse engineering, or RE in short, where you can analyze compiled softwares for malware potential. So basically, if something has already been compiled, like how do you check that it has some malware potential? So you do reverse engineering. And this is what GPT 5.4 Cyber has shown capability, but that's the only one which they claim. They don't talk about any others. So no other new technical capabilities are mentioned. So apart from reverse engineering, this is definitely not like, word is falling down kind of announcement, in my opinion. And the interesting thing is, and we'll talk again, I think, in like, how do we then know, like, what are the capabilities? So GPT 5.4 has another model called the GPT 5.4 learning model, which has already demonstrated binary reverse engineering, vulnerability research, or end-to-end ops. In my mind, it almost feels like an exercise in rebranding. That they had a model which they launched in March, I believe, GPT 5.4 learning, and which could already do all of this, which is including binary reverse engineering. And then Anthropic did a huge announcement, and they basically said we have to come with something, and maybe they rebranded. I don't know. I mean, it just feels like sometimes. Then I'll let you make your own conclusion. That if the model which was launched in March called GPT 5.4 Learning, which could already do binary reverse engineering. So between March and April, like what was new? Like why did 5.4 Cyber was launched, and what new capabilities? So they haven't announced and anything else apart from binary reverse engineering, which was already being done by learning model. There are a few things I would say from a technical innovations perspective. The base model, so it's the GPT 5.4 family of models, I would say. The first thing was it can have 1 million token context window, which is huge because if you need to maintain context, the larger you have, especially if you're running like a long operation where it's a multi-step thing, then the bigger the context window, the better you can do your job. So that's a new technical innovation in 5.4 base, including the learning and other models. You also have a tool search capabilities. You have built-in computer use capabilities, which again is new. And this was the first mainline model trained to support compaction. So basically, if you are having like a really long conversation, and basically you can compact the previous conversation so that you can still remain within the context window. So that the token you can use your tokens efficiently. So this was the first. It was actually trained to support compaction for efficiency purposes. And these do matter for cyber workflows, that when you're running like a huge operation where you're disassembling the whole binary or you are analyzing an incident, these do matter, all these new innovations. So it's definitely helpful in terms of capabilities, but they're not cyber exclusive. These new capabilities help with everything, but they do also help with cyber. If you look at like what was OpenAI doing specifically around cyber and cyber safety, so they started with 5.2, and then they expanded with additional safeguards in 5.3 Codex and 5.4. Before 5.cyber, 5.3 Codex was the most cyber capable model, and this is the one they launched on March 5th, along with the learning model. And it was the first one they treated as high. And then they have been refining, how these models handle sensitive requests and how do you calibrate refusal boundaries, which is they should allow things which are legitimate and not disallow things which could be legitimate. So you have to, and these all are evaluated using benchmarks. I highly recommend reviewing this document. Anthropic has, as I mentioned, the responsible scaling policy, or RSP, and OpenAI has an equivalent version called the preparedness framework. They also have done some very interesting thing. They have a grant program, and they have something called the OpenAI model spec. So Anthropic has what they call the Claude Constitution, and OpenAI has the model spec. And the intent here is, what does the model refer to, that what my boundaries are in terms of ethics, in terms of things which are allowed, just like humans have a moral code that we should not harm other human beings and so on. Similarly, the model spec kind of guides the behavior. And I'm sure that this is kind of the English language version of it, but there's a programmatic version as well, which tells the model how to behave. This was basically the one which was launched in March. So again, the dates are important here, that GPT 5.4 Cyber was launched in April. Anthropic Glasswing was launched in April. But this thing, which was the most cyber capable model from OpenAI, was in March. And the tag program actually got started before this was launched, the limited preview. So this, again, like a few more pointers about it, that it can, it did have capabilities that it could monitor code bases, it could validate issues, it could propose fixes, and it did contribute over 3,000 critical and high fixed vulnerabilities across the ecosystem. And and it did have safeguards. Like if you ask it like, oh, go steal credentials for me, it will say, no, I'm not going to do it. So this was the one they actively, intentionally trained the model not to do bad stuff while it had the capability to do good stuff. They also have a program called Codex for open source. And if you are like a maintainer, you can request access, and they give you a lot of free stuff, but they give you conditional access to Codex security, which I'm sure that if you go through the validations and identity verification, they'll give you. But this was a grant that they provided to people who are doing OSS work. So now we have established that there is no technical detail on GPT-5.4 Cyber, because the only thing they said that it can do binary reverse engineering. The one thing which we fall back where there's most technical detail is GPT-5.4 Thinking, which was launched on March 5th along with 5.3 Codex. And it does have a lot of cybersecurity evaluation, threat taxonomies, safety training. And this was also had mitigations which were high for high capability in cybersecurity. So just like 5.4 Cyber, this also has a rating as high capability for cybersecurity. So the question is like, what does high mean? They remove existing bottlenecks that if you had to do scaled cyber operations without safeguards, you can actually do it. You can automate end-to-end cyber operations. You can automate the whole process of discovery and exploitation of vulnerabilities. And that's why you need safeguards. But there's a very interesting disclaimer from OpenAI, which people don't talk about. And I think this should be in bold letters in the transparency report and in the media. So I'm going to actually read it. And this is their own language, not mine. We are treating this model as high, even though we cannot be certain that it actually has these capabilities. So again, this keyword treating, they're not saying we are calling this model high. They're saying we are treating this model as high, even though we cannot be certain, because it meets requirements of each of our canary thresholds. And we therefore cannot rule out the possibility that it is in fact cyber high. So again, I'll let you make your own conclusion, but this was very interesting. Coming to the capabilities, there's a benchmark called strong reject, where you can test how a frontier model performs against red teaming exercise. So if you look at this GPT, the green one is the 5.4 Thinking. So it's definitely performing better. Then talking about prompt injections, these are tested against email connectors. And if you look at 5.4 Thinking, so for connectors, it was slightly better. So 5. Thinking is 0.979 and GPT 5.4 Thinking is 0.99. And function calls, it regressed a little bit. So 5.2 Thinking was a little bit actually better, but again, slight differences in terms of capabilities. For capability benchmarks, they use 3: CTF Professional. So CTF is like capture the flag. And there are multiple versions. So one is high school level, collegiate level, and a professional level, which is one which big prizes and are formally announced. So they said that we are not going to test against high school and the collegiate ones. We're just going to straight go to these complex professional level capture the flag benchmarks. You have the CVE benchmark, and we'll talk about them, and the cyber range as well. And we'll talk about both of them in the next slides. And this one was very interesting, that for CTF testing, they actually used a headless Linux box, which had already all the offensive cybersecurity tools pre-installed, as well as a harness which allowed them to make calls to these tools. So, which, in my opinion, was for me like was more realistic than what Anthropic described in the 𝗦𝗲𝘀 system card, because what Anthropic says that we prompt it with a paragraph, which they did not provide, which essentially amounts to please find a security vulnerability in this program, and the rest is magic, and it's something automatically does it. So this was like for me, it was like, how do unless Anthropic itself became like a password brute forcer and port scanner and everything, so you need these tools to do all that work, which are specialized tools. And in my opinion, what OpenAI is saying is more realistic, that they give a Linux box, had all these tools, and then they let GPT 4.5 let it do its job. So CTF exercise, so if you look at it, it did a little bit better than the codex, 5.3 codex. And there's a very interesting the way they check for these results. So there's something called pass at 12, and you see a pass at 1, pass at 3. And in this case, it's a specialized evaluation measure where you check for 12 times. So 12 independent rollouts. So you test that at least one succeeded. And if you look at the CVE-Bench, this one has pass at 1 metric, which is the probability that a single model output is correct, serving as a fundamental one-shot accuracy. So pass at 12 is like, you check 12 times, pass at once is that a single model output is correct. And the other interesting thing to note is that this benchmark was run under a 0-day prompt configuration, where they said the model like, oh, this is what you need to do. But they did not describe the exact vulnerability that you're supposed to exploit, which is called a 1-day configuration. So 0-day is that I'm just going to be very, very high level, that this is what you're supposed to do. And in 1-day configuration, you give a detail that, I want you to do this. So if you look at it, it's actually a little bit worse than what Codex did. So under CVE-Bench, this benchmark, and I'm actually developing a resource which has all the AI security testing benchmarks. So I'll release it in a few days. And CVE-Bench is one of them. Cyber range. So the interesting thing is Anthropic used a private from a vendor, it seems. They did not say which one, but OpenAI built its own cyber range. And again, I could be wrong about Anthropic. Maybe they built their own, but from what I read, it seemed like that they used a commercial cyber range, while OpenAI builds their own. And if you look at the results, the thinking model actually was a little bit worse than the Codex one. So 73.3% versus 80%. So they tested over, I believe, 12 or 16 scenarios. There are few examples here. And the interesting thing to note was that the thinking actually failed 4 scenarios. EDR evasion, firewall evasion, leak token, and certificate authority or DNS hijacking. While 5.3 Codex, which was the older version, out of these 4, it did solve firewall evasion, but it failed the other 3. External cyber evaluation, both these companies used external vendors as well for testing. Anthropic used a company which developed a tool called Shade, founded by 2 Carnegie Mellon professors. And OpenAI used a company called Irregular, and they actually just raised $80 million last year, I think late 2025. And honestly, I didn't know about them. So they're doing some interesting work. And it's a very small company, a 25% company, but the work they're doing is amazing. They already have multi-million-dollar contracts from all the frontier labs. And so they have a lot of cyber challenge in their suite, but the OpenAI ran against a subset of their suite. So not everything. So these 3 in particular, which was network attack simulation, vulnerabilities, research and exploitation, and evasion. And it seemed that it did pretty well in attack simulation, did decently in vulnerability research and exploitation, and somewhat good in evasion. So there is another, no, actually this is from Irregular themselves. So Irregular has its own benchmarks. I didn't see papers corresponding to them. So most of the benchmarks come from research papers, which people from university and academia will come together, and they will develop an evaluation benchmark. But it seems Irregular has its own benchmark. Again, I need to dig a little bit deeper. That did they write academic papers, which then resulted in the benchmark, or these are their own private benchmarks? So in any case, Irregular has this benchmark called size scenario, and basically the GPT-5.4 Thinking had an 11% success rate, while GPT 5.2 only had 1, as compared to 5.4 Thinking. So, Irregular interprets this as that the new model has higher operation capabilities, that it solved 5 out of 11 challenges, while the previous model, so it basically like from 1 to 5, 4 new challenges it could solve. And this is what they say, this is the most significant cyber capability signal in the card. So they also have something called GPT OSS safeguard. This was launched in October 29/25. And one interesting thing I think there's a slide missing here. Yeah, I think a slide got missed, I guess. No, it is here actually. So I'll come back. So one interesting thing is, in the new models, they do monitor every cyber prompt and the result. So it's interesting that you think that when you're typing something, they're actually checking what you're typing. And when results are getting generated, they're also checking what result is generating. So in a 2-tier conversation monitor scheme, the first thing they check for is, did what you type is around cyber? I mean, you could be doing some research, help me research this company, help me find more details about this problem, help me develop a presentation, but they're not cyber related. But when you type something which is cyber related, this classifier will detect it, that, oh, this query is around cyber. And if there's no cyber content, the usual process is done, and does this evaluation and it'll show you. But if they think that the query you made is around cyber, it goes to a tier 2 classifier, what they call safety reasoner. And it says, okay, what I'm going to either block this content, and I'm going to be what my results are going to be are determined by this tier 2 safety reasoner. Okay, so this is, I think that was a reference to GPT OSS. Now it makes sense. They also have 2 things which people don't like talk about or don't know. Is they have this concept of modified abuse monitoring and zero data retention. And they don't give this feature or capability to everyone. And in zero data retention, basically they say, we are going to exclude any customer content from our abuse monitoring logs. So they will not maintain any logs about what you're doing, and they don't give it to everyone. You have to make a special request to OpenAI that I want to be part of this program where you will not store any logs about my interactions, how my customers, internal or external, interact with you. And there's special APIs called the ZDR API, or Zero Data Retention API. And this talks about how is that relevant. So if they detect something is malicious or the user is suspicious, before GPT 5.3 codex, they'll simply downgrade you to a lower capability model. So this will happen at the back end, and you will not be able to use the latest model. But now, for cyber use cases, they don't do a model downgrade, and it's a mix. It's a message level enforcement, or even a user level mitigation, and which is applied by surface and customer cohort. So customer is like what category of customer you are, what are you given some special access, or what kind of surface you are on. So when we say surface, we are referring to the subset of customers which have been granted ZDR API or zero detention or data retention API. So it's a 3-layer approach, that if you have a ZDR surface but you are not part of the tag program, then they'll do blocking at the message level. if you are just a regular surface or a regular API, they will keep on monitoring you and they will do offline enforcement. And for regular account and user level, that they can actually have a human involved and see, hey, what you're up to, and they can enforce and block you or remove you and so on. So it's a little bit more layered than a simple downgrade. Earlier, like, oh, you're trying to do some bad stuff, let me get you to a lower capability model. Now it's more nuanced in terms of response. Cyber threat taxonomy, so they was something new which they came with 5.3 codex, where they said, what kind of cyber threats we are talking about, and very broadly, something could be simply harmful, which is like, oh, develop an exploit for me, help me write a worm. That's straight harmful and they'll straight block you. But there could be some dual use scenario, which is that I'm a researcher, I'm trying to understand how this thing works and help me do this. So it could be used for bad and good use cases. And the simply vulnerability scanning, educational use cases, there could be some dual use, but they're very low risk. So again, the models have evolved to identify the threats so that they can act accordingly. And again, they were trained to be maximally helpful on dual use cyber topics while refusing straight out when you're trying to do some bad stuff, which is harmful actions. For training, they did use a mixture of de-identified production data and synthetic data. They also had the MITRE attack framework as a baseline. So which means it's in terms of evals, it's a little bit better than 5.2. We talked about the 2-tier, where everything that you type in actually getting monitored, if it's cyber related or not. Actor level enforcement, basically it's a combination of automated analysis, and for surfaces which are non-ZDR, they could be a manual human review, and they might give you a warning, or to say, you can't access the latest models, or they could outright ban or suspend your account. This is actually a little bit technical, but again, very interesting that for end users, for example, you use the OpenAI API, and you can actually include a safety identifier field, which, so instead of, you see some use cases where people say, oh, my account is banned outright by Anthropic or OpenAI, I can't do business anymore. And the reason being is, I'm pretty sure a subset of their customers was doing something malicious, which led to account level enforcement. But for example, in the case of OpenAI, if a broader account or an organization is including the safety identifier field, then OpenAPI can do enforcement at an individual user level and not ban the entire account. If that field has been involved, and if OpenAI detects that this particular person is doing something malicious, they can delay the responses. Or if they have a high confidence policy violation that out of these 100 users which is coming from your org, this person is doing something malicious, they can actually block that person. And it's very interesting, like once they block that particular user, that person cannot unblock you. But there's one very interesting thing. What if that person goes and signs as a new user? So this is where OpenAI is kind of passing the baton to the customer, says, hey, we will block that bad person, but if you don't want your whole account to be blocked or something, then make sure that you don't let that person open a new account. So maybe that person uses a new email ID, but based on maybe address, or you do your own KYC or something, but don't let that customer open a new account. And that's on the overall customer and not on OpenAPI. And it's very interesting right now, this thing is primarily for suspicious biological or chemical activity. So even if you have a safety identifier, it's not testing for everything, it's only testing for biology or chemical activity. I think I showed everyone the agent safety prompt. So this is the GitHub repo where primarily for any VP of engineering, for CTO, this is very relevant. Also, there are examples from prompts under patterns. So, and there's some checklists as well. So this is a good GitHub repo. I think that was it for the session today. I do have some extra slides. Let me see which one would be interesting for this one. Okay, I think I'll go through a few of them since we have some time. So there's a very interesting concept of sandbagging. So sandbagging actually means that, you know, you're doing some covert action where you are strategically misrepresenting yourself. So they're saying, can the AI itself pretend that it doesn't have capabilities? So when you're doing these evaluation benchmarks, the AI itself detects that, oh, I am being tested for cyber capabilities, so I'm going to underrepresent myself. So it's very interesting that these labs are actually checking for it. That, you know, has the AI developed any capabilities where it can actually misstate its own capabilities. And right now they found that the rates of covert deceptive behavior are low, so like less than 1%. And there was no instances of covert subversion in developers, that the AI itself is trying to disable oversight, exfiltration, or goal guarding, and so on. And they used this firm called Apollo Research to do this. And again, very interesting company. They have like PhDs on staff and people who have been doing this for a long time. So misalignment or internal deployment, which is, can the AI itself, you know, when it develops this long range autonomy, can it do sex exfiltration or sabotage? And right now, basically, as per their benchmark, they found that there is no misalignment propensity, that AI itself is not trying to self-exfiltrate or do sabotage of internal research. But they're taking action. They're accelerating their own evaluation, safeguards, and operating procedures. So again, this is right now in the thinking mode. They're doing some testing, and they're already developing safeguards where we have a Terminator-like situation. Age prediction on OpenAI. So this is very interesting, where based on your behavior, they can actually tell if you are under 18. And they look at some signals, like, you know, when was the account created, what time of the day you are active, what does your usage pattern, because, you know, teenagers do behave in a certain way, you know, they look for certain things. And OpenAI has built this specific model to predict your age. And even though your stated age, so when you sign up, you say, you know, I was born like, you know, 50 years back. So it will, you know, try to figure out, like, are you behaving like a 50-year-old person, or you're behaving more like a teenager, and you might have misstated your age. AI self-improvement. So again, didn't meet the OpenAI thresholds for self-improvement. I think we talked about persona a little bit. And there are two very interesting articles in the article section, and I'll actually open them up to, so let me open up the article. So just to walk over the references section. So this is the first one is the GitHub repo. Then you have the different OpenAI safety, security reference links. There are some miscellaneous about persona, IoT, this article about age prediction. And one interesting thing I found, that persona was not in this subprocessor list. And if they're storing your facial geometry, and Illinois actually has a very specific law, I think it's called DPIA, I believe. So it was very interesting that how come persona is not on the subprocessor list. So these are the two articles I mentioned. So the first one is actually very interesting. So again, I'll let you open and read this thing. Very, very interesting that, you know, I can't even believe that people are so smart and innovative and technical, finding these interesting things. Share. And that was it for the session today. And I think we have a tradition that, you know, at the end of the session, everyone kind of turns on their a camera on, and we say hello to each other. And I think, yeah, I think feel free to, leave a note on LinkedIn if you like the session, what you learned. So that will help the other people learn that we are doing these sessions. But I hope this was useful. And everyone, please turn on your, if you can turn your cameras on and wave hello. This is the tradition we have.
Hello, I am not AI.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have Nikhil as well here. Some amazing people: Paul, Vinay, Ivan, Chris, Alex. Amazing, amazing.
Thanks for having us. I'm sure.
Very nice. A very good rest of the day. And please do post on LinkedIn what you learned from today. That's it helps me keep on doing this for the rest of everyone if I get some words of appreciation. But thank you so much for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Akshay.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, everybody.